Do as I said or quit. Paige Sutherland's voice carried flat across the job site. The whole crew went still under the crane. Travis Boone didn't argue. He set the brass spirit level down on the tool bench, pulled off his hard hat, and dropped it beside it. He gathered a few things into a canvas bag, nothing rushed, nothing dramatic, and walked off the site without looking back. Wind came up off the James River. Nobody on that crew said a word. Before you find out what happens next, ask yourself this. When the quietest person on the team walks away, is the job really finished, or is it just starting to fall apart? 3. Travis Boone ran the crew as site foreman, had for almost 2 years, showing up before the first truck and staying past the last one. Nobody asked much about him beyond the fact that he raised a daughter alone and kept to himself. He wasn't cold. He just didn't offer more than the job required. The first time Paige really talked to him, she'd come down to the site in shoes not meant for gravel, trailed by nobody, trying to look like she belonged there. She asked him bluntly if they'd hit the poor date. He told her yes, barring weather, and then told her exactly which section might slip if the rain held through Thursday. No hedging, no spin. Most people up in the trailer tell me what they think I want to hear, she said. I figure you'd rather know, Travis said, and went back to marking a stake in the ground, like the conversation hadn't been anything worth lingering over. Walking back to her car, she realized something. He was the only person on that site who hadn't tried to manage what he told her. Curtis Doyle's office sat 2 doors from hers at headquarters. VP of construction for 20 years, the man everyone had assumed would run things when her father stepped back. Her father had picked his daughter instead, quietly, over a Sunday phone call 2 weeks before the stroke, and had never fully explained his reasoning to anyone, including Paige. Curtis never said a word against it in a meeting. He didn't need to. Numbers came to her a day late. Site reports arrived with just enough missing that she had to ask follow-up questions in front of the board, questions that made her sound like she didn't know her own project. He was good at it, good enough that she couldn't point to any single thing and call it sabotage, only a pattern that left her a half step behind in every room that mattered. That evening, in a small rental house 2 miles from the site, Travis stood at the kitchen table while his daughter Grace, 8 years old, drew a map of a country she'd invented, rivers running the wrong direction on purpose because she liked how it looked. Travis leaned over her shoulder, pointing out where a bridge might go. By the door sat a battered canvas tool bag, and next to it, on a little shelf he'd built himself, the brass spirit level, the one thing from his old life that came with him everywhere. Along the barrel, worn thin from handling. Get it level, then get it right. Grace caught him looking at it once. She didn't ask. She just told him the bridge needed to be bigger, and he agreed, and made it bigger. Later, after she'd gone to bed, he sat alone at the table a while longer, turning the level over in his hands the way he did most nights without quite meaning to, like checking that something was still where he'd left it. Back at the site the next morning, Paige crossed paths with Travis near the rebar cages stacked along the fence line. He wasn't measuring anything that needed measuring. He was crouched at a column base, running his hand along a joint, checking something with a level that wasn't standard site equipment, brass instead of the yellow plastic ones the rest of the crew carried. Paige slowed her step. Foremen didn't usually double-check structural joints with their own tools, on their own time, with a level that looked older than half the men on the crew. She almost asked. Her phone buzzed with a call from the bonding office, and she kept walking. Travis kept checking. Neither of them said anything, and neither of them forgot it. Renee Walsh had run compliance and HR at Sutherland Development for 9 years, and before that had spent a decade moving through construction offices around Richmond, the kind of career where everybody eventually hears the same stories twice, filed away and half forgotten until something dredges them back up. She was updating a routine safety certification file on a Tuesday afternoon when she reached the name Travis Boone and stopped. It wasn't the file. It was the name. For years ago, in engineering circles around the city, people had talked for a while about a structural engineer who refused to stamp a certification for a downtown renovation, a job backed by a developer with a son on the city council. Word was the engineer found the load-bearing work cut short to save money, refused to sign off, and within a year couldn't get hired on anything bigger than a garage addition. Nobody had accused him of anything. Contracts had simply stopped coming, one general contractor at a time, the kind of quiet freeze that never shows up in a lawsuit because there's nothing to sue over, Just phone calls that don't get returned and bids that mysteriously go to someone else. His own consulting firm folded not long after. Renee had heard the name once or twice back then. Boone Structural. She'd never connected it to the quiet man running crews on the riverfront job, not until she saw it typed out in black and white on an insurance form. She sat with the file a while, remembering fragments. A good firm, people said, an honest one, which in that industry sometimes meant the same thing as unlucky. She wanted to say something. To someone. But nothing in the file confirmed it outright. And in her seat, jumping to conclusions about an employee's past came with real consequences. She could guess what she was looking at. She couldn't be the one to say it out loud. Not yet. That afternoon, Paige walked the perimeter of the site and saw Travis again. This time standing back from a poured section, arms crossed, studying it the way an inspector studies something, not the way a foreman glances at concrete on his way to the next task. She didn't stop, but she noticed, again, that whatever he was looking at, he looked at it like he already knew where the trouble would show up before it did. Later, in the compliance office, Renee watched Travis through the window as he walked a crew member through a safety checklist. Patient, thorough, no wasted words. She thought about the rumor she half remembered and wondered, if it was true, what it must feel like to know exactly how a building should stand and spend your days being told to look the other way. She locked the file cabinet, later than she needed to, and told herself she'd bring it up if it ever actually mattered, and hoped, without quite admitting it to herself, that it never would. Curtis needed a quiet place to cut a corner, and the riverfront job gave him one. He called Travis into the trailer on a Thursday and told him to sign off on the foundation pour for Section 2 by end of week, ahead of the concrete subcontractor's schedule, before the rebar inspection had cleared. Travis told him plainly that he wasn't putting his name on a readiness sign-off until the inspection cleared. That was exactly what the sign-off meant, and skipping it wasn't a shortcut. It was a risk he wasn't willing to take responsibility for. "You've signed off on tighter schedules than this," Curtis said, leaning against the trailer door, the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile. "Not without the inspection," Travis said. "Get it cleared, I'll sign the same day." Curtis nodded slowly, like a man who'd already decided how this would read on paper. He wrote it up anyway, Travis refusing a direct scheduling order from leadership, worded just carefully enough to leave out the part about the missing inspection. He walked back to his own office and sat with the memo a while before sending it, reading it over twice, the way a man reads something he wants to sound fair. It wasn't a lie, not exactly, not in the way a lie usually looked. It just left out the one detail that would have made all the difference, and he knew it, and he sent it anyway. Upstairs at headquarters, the board sat for the quarterly review, and Curtis walked them through numbers he'd shaped with care. Section 2 behind schedule. Cost creeping. He didn't blame anyone by name. He didn't have to. He let the pauses after each number do that for him, and Paige felt every eye in the room land on her like she was the reason the ground hadn't moved fast enough. She caught Curtis glancing her way once, brief and unreadable, and told herself she was imagining the satisfaction underneath it. One board member, older than her father, asked what she planned to do about accountability on the ground. She said she'd handle it. She hadn't meant it as a promise to anyone in particular. It came out that way regardless. Another board member, gentler, asked if she needed more time to settle into the role before they revisited quarterly targets. She said no before she'd even finished thinking about whether that was true. She left the meeting with her jaw tight, aware that people in that building were starting to wonder whether she had what it took to run it. That evening, working past dark, she drove out to the site instead of home and found Travis alone near Section 2 with a flashlight, running his hand along a rebar joint he had no reason to be checking twice. "You always do this after hours?" she asked. He didn't look up right away. "Some things you can't see right in daylight," he said, and kept working. It wasn't much of an answer, but she stood there longer than she needed to, watching a man check work that wasn't his to check, for no one, on his own time. She thought about Curtis's slides upstairs, all those careful pauses. She thought about the fact that Travis was raising a kid alone, which meant somebody was waiting at home for him right now, and he was still out here with a flashlight checking rebar nobody had asked him to check. She said goodnight. He said it back, and neither of them made more of it than that. But she carried it the whole drive home, the plainness of it, the gap between a man who explained everything and delivered nothing, and a man who explained almost nothing, and somehow the building still stood straight. She thought about her father, too, who used to say the quiet ones were the ones worth keeping, and how she'd never really understood what he meant until she saw it standing on a ladder with a flashlight at 8:30 at night. Curtis's memo landed on Paige's desk Monday morning, 2 pages under the header, Site Compliance, Foreman Conduct. It said Travis Boone had refused a direct scheduling order from leadership, missed the resulting deadline, and shown a pattern that, left unaddressed, would undermine authority across every crew on the project. Attached was an email Curtis had written and sent only after the pour had already been delayed, dated to look like a warning Travis had ignored from the start. Curtis didn't recommend firing him. He was smarter than that. He recommended something visible enough that the whole crew understood the new CEO wouldn't be pushed around. People are watching how you handle the small stuff, he told her, standing in her doorway like he had every right to be giving advice. Handle this. The big stuff gets easier. He said it kindly, almost warmly, the way a man says something he's rehearsed enough times that it no longer feels like a manipulation to him, only good sense he's passing along. Paige read it twice. She didn't know the inspection had never cleared. She didn't know Curtis had assigned the sign-off directly, skipping the process that would have caught it. She saw a missed deadline and a board that had spent an hour making her feel like she couldn't hold the ground under her own project. She decided to act, not because she wanted to, but because some part of her believed this was exactly the moment to prove she could. Down on the site, unaware of any of it, Travis had found something real. Reviewing the structural drawings during a routine walkthrough, he noticed a detail that didn't match what he'd watched go into the ground. Support spacing thinner than the plans called for, the kind of difference that wouldn't fail today or even this year, but would matter eventually. The exact shape of a problem he used to spend his whole career catching before it became one. He didn't report it up the chain. He flagged it within his own authority, adjusted the crew's sequencing to leave room for a proper fix, and said nothing else. Old habits, the kind that used to be a whole career, came back easier than he expected, settling into his hands the same way they used to, like a language he'd told himself he'd forgotten and hadn't. That Saturday, he took Grace to a park along the James, the water running high and brown after a week of rain. She sat cross-legged, adding a mountain range to her invented country while he watched the current. She asked him, not for the first time, what the level was for. Making sure things stand straight, he said. Even when nobody's checking? Especially then, he said, and she nodded like that settled something, and went back to her mountains, and the river kept moving past them both. The trailer filled at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The whole crew called in under the pretense of a scheduled briefing, Curtis standing near the door with his arms folded like a man who already knew how the next 10 minutes would go. Paige opened with the numbers, the delay, the board's questions, the investors due on site in 2 weeks. Then she turned toward Travis, standing near the back in his work vest, level in hand out of habit more than need. She told him refusing a direct order from leadership wasn't something she could let stand. There's a process for a readiness sign-off, Travis said, calm, even. I told Curtis that the day he asked. I'm not saying no to the pour. I'm saying it needs the inspection first, for everyone's sake, mine included. Curtis cut in before Paige could respond. He was told what to do. He didn't do it. It's that simple. It wasn't simple, but Paige didn't know that yet, and the weight of the room, the board's questions still echoing, the sense that everyone was watching to see if she'd bend, pushed the words out of her before she'd fully decided to say them. Do as I said or quit. Travis didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He looked at her a long moment. Not angry, something quieter than angry. Then set the level on the bench, pulled off his hard hat, and packed a few things into his bag. He walked out past the trailer, past the crew, out toward the gate, and didn't look back once. Curtis's face settled into something close to satisfaction. Paige stood at the front of the trailer, aware something in the room had shifted, though she couldn't yet say what. Travis's truck pulled out of the lot and turned toward home, the brass level riding on the passenger seat, worn letters catching the afternoon light. Get it level, then get it right. Inside, the meeting broke apart into the kind of quiet that isn't really quiet, just people not knowing what to say to each other. A few of the crew looked at Curtis and then looked away just as fast, the way people do when they've seen something they'd rather not have an opinion about out loud. Renee heard within the hour from someone in the office who'd been standing near the trailer, and her face changed the way it changes when something you've been half expecting finally happens. That night, Paige sat in her office long after everyone had left, looking down at the empty gravel lot where Travis's truck used to sit. For the first time since she'd taken this job, she asked herself a question she didn't have an answer to. What did I just do? 2 days after Travis walked off the site, an independent inspector doing a routine pass caught what he'd been quietly managing without anyone's knowledge. A support run thinner than spec, close enough to code that it might have passed unnoticed for months, if anyone besides Travis had been watching for it. The report landed on Paige's desk with a formality that made her stomach drop. Phrases like minor deficiency and recommend correction before continued pour, and she understood, reading it, that whatever Travis had been doing out there after hours with a flashlight, it hadn't been nothing. She called the new foreman down to walk the section with her, a decent enough man who'd been on the crew 2 years but had never once, by his own admission, thought to double-check a joint that wasn't flagged on his list. Travis used to just do that, he told her, almost apologetically, like he was confessing to a habit he should have picked up and hadn't. Never made a thing of it. Just did it. That same week, her assistant, working through the tedious job of digitizing legal files for every property in the company's portfolio, called Paige down to a storage room stacked with document boxes. Sutherland Development had bought a downtown office building years before Paige joined the company, one of the older assets on the books, and buried in its permit history was a full set of structural drawings, stamped and signed. Travis Boone, P. Paige stood there a long moment, holding pages that didn't match the man in a work vest and hard hat she'd told to do as she said or quit. The drawings were meticulous, margins full of small calculations in a handwriting she now recognized from job site notes he'd once handed her on a clipboard, the same careful, unhurried letters. She flipped through the building's history next, almost without meaning to. That same downtown building had come through a major flood years back with barely a crack in it, while 3 buildings on the same block had needed months of structural repair. The insurance report from that year, filed in the same box, credited the building's survival to conservative load calculations well above code minimum. She hadn't known why until now, and reading it felt like being handed the answer to a question she hadn't known she'd been asking for 2 years. She called Renee into her office and closed the door. She didn't ease into it. You knew something about him, didn't you? Renee was quiet a long moment, the kind of quiet that comes from finally being allowed to say what you've been carrying. I only had a rumor, she said. A structural engineer who wouldn't sign off on a job he thought was unsafe and paid for it. I didn't know it was him until I saw his name on a form a few weeks ago, and I didn't have proof, so I didn't say anything. She looked at Paige steadily. I think you have proof now. Paige looked down at the stamped drawings on her desk, then at Curtis's memo, still filed exactly where she'd left it. She set them side by side. For the first time, she asked the question she should have asked before that meeting in the trailer ever happened. Who actually canceled that inspection? Paige spent 2 days pulling records nobody had asked her to pull. The inspection Curtis claimed had cleared didn't exist in any file. No report, no inspector's signature, nothing but Curtis's own note in the project log marking it complete a full week before the actual inspector had even been scheduled to come out. She checked the date 3 times, certain she was misreading it, and wasn't. She kept pulling. The material costs behind the delay Curtis had presented to the board traced back to a supplier contract he'd personally negotiated 18 months earlier, at a markup well above what 2 competing bids had offered, with a company that turned out to be run by a man Curtis had known for years. She pulled the bid comparisons twice, certain she'd misread the numbers, and found the same gap both times, wide enough that no honest accounting could explain it away as market rate. She cross-referenced the developer's name from Renee's old rumor almost as an afterthought, and found the connection sitting right there in the paperwork. The same developer who'd frozen Travis out of the industry 4 years ago had done business with Curtis twice since, both times through that same supplier. She sat with that a long while, the shape of it settling into place. It hadn't been random. Curtis had known exactly who Travis was, and exactly what leverage that history gave him, from the day he assigned that sign-off. A quiet man with a reason not to make noise, an easy target dressed up as a routine scheduling decision. She called Curtis into her office that afternoon. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. She laid it out. The missing inspection, the inflated supplier contract, the connection to the same developer who'd broken Travis's firm years earlier. Curtis tried his usual ease, the confidence that filled a room and made people feel like they were on his side. But there was nothing left to be confident about with the paperwork sitting between them. That inspection would have cleared eventually, he said. I was saving us a week. You logged it as complete before it was even scheduled, Curtis. That's not saving time. That's fabrication. She slid the memo across the desk. And you used a man's worst year against him because it was convenient. I don't care how long you've been here. That's the part one can't get past. He didn't have an answer for that one. He sat there a moment longer, the confidence draining out of his posture in a way Paige hadn't expected to feel anything about. And then he stood, straightened his jacket out of habit, and left without another word. The board meeting came together within the week. Paige stood at the same table where she'd once said 7 words she couldn't take back, and laid out everything. The fabricated inspection log, the inflated contract, the 4-year-old grudge Curtis had quietly leaned on without anyone noticing. She kept her voice level the whole time, the way she imagined Travis might have, laying out facts without asking anyone to feel a particular way about them. One board member, the same man who'd pressed her about accountability weeks earlier, asked if this was the same foreman named in Curtis's memo. Paige told him it was, and that the memo itself had been the problem, not the solution. Another board member asked, almost gently, why nobody had caught this sooner. Because he never made noise about it, Paige said. He just did the work right and let the rest of us assume that was all it was. Nobody argued the point. The vote came back 5-1. Curtis Doyle was suspended, pending a review everyone in the room understood would end one way. That evening, alone in her office, Paige read through the fabricated sign-off request one more time, next to the stamped drawings from the flood-proof building downtown. He'd been right twice now, for years apart, in 2 different lives, and both times it had cost him something. She thought about the 11 seconds of silence in that trailer and understood, finally, exactly what she'd been looking at. A week after the meeting that ended everything, Paige drove out to a quiet street near the river she'd never had a reason to visit before. Travis's house sat small and tidy behind a chain-link fence, porch light already on though it wasn't dark yet. He was on the front steps with a folder of papers on his knee, the brass level resting beside him like it always did. He looked up when her car door shut, but didn't say anything until she'd crossed the yard. From somewhere behind the house, Grace's voice carried, narrating something to herself. The screen door tapping shut a moment later as she came around front, saw a stranger, and gave a small wave before her father told her he'd be in soon. She disappeared back around the side without asking questions, used, it seemed, to her father having quiet conversations on the porch. I came to say I was wrong, Paige said. No preamble, no lead-up, just that. Travis studied her a moment, then set the folder aside and moved over on the step, an invitation more than a word. She sat. They didn't talk about the site. Not right away. Paige asked how long he'd lived in Richmond, and Travis told her almost 2 years, that he'd come here because it was far enough from where his old firm used to be that nobody asked questions, and close enough to good schools that Grace could put down roots. He'd picked the house, he said, mostly because of the porch, somewhere he could sit outside in the evenings without needing to explain to anyone why he wasn't inside. Was it hard? Paige asked, starting somewhere new after everything that happened? Harder to stay still than to move, I think, Travis said. For a while I figured the safest thing was to stop being an engineer altogether. Just show up, do good work, don't put my name on anything that could get taken away from me again. Paige turned that over, quiet. I read the drawings today. The building downtown. It held through the flood because of you. It held because the numbers were right, he said. I just made sure they stayed that way. You could have signed what Curtis wanted. Nobody would have known for years, if ever. I'd have known, Travis said, simply, like that was the whole answer, because it was. The developer 4 years ago, Paige said carefully. The one who cost you the firm. I didn't put it together right away, but he's done business with Curtis twice since then. Same supplier both times. Travis didn't look surprised, only tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Small industry, he said. People like that find each other eventually. I stopped being shocked by it a while back. Doesn't it make you angry? Knowing it wasn't a coincidence. It did, he admitted. For about a year. Then Grace started kindergarten, and I didn't have room left for angry most days. He looked out toward the street. Some of it's still in there. I won't pretend it isn't. Paige looked at the small house, the porch light, a row of tools lined neatly along the side wall. It wasn't a man who'd lost everything and settled for less. It was a man who'd rebuilt something smaller, on purpose, and kept it honest. I should have asked more questions before that trailer, she said. Before I said what I said. You believe the guy who'd been there 20 years over the one who checks rebar after hours for no reason, Travis said. That's not a character flaw. That's just how it usually goes. Doesn't make it right. No, he agreed. It doesn't. He looked over at her, something almost like humor in it. For what it's worth, I've had worse things said to me in a trailer. That's not much comfort. Wasn't meant to be comfort. Just true. They sat without talking for a while after that, the river catching the last light 2 blocks down, the sound of Grace humming something tuneless through an open window. Paige's eyes settled on the level beside him, the worn letters along the barrel. Get it level, then get it right. She didn't ask what it meant. She already understood. You didn't need to drive out here, Travis finally said. I know, Paige said. That was all. She stood, thanked him for letting her sit, and walked back to her car. She didn't look back either, though for a different reason than he had 3 weeks earlier. Travis watched her taillights disappear at the end of the street, then looked down at the level in his hands. For 2 years he'd told himself invisible was safer. Sitting there in the porch light, for the first time, he wasn't so sure that was true. Curtis's termination became official within 2 weeks. Once the full review turned up what everyone already suspected, the fabricated inspection log, the inflated supplier contract, and a pattern of pressure on junior staff that Renee had quietly documented longer than anyone realized. Paige brought in a temporary structural consultant to keep Section 2 moving, but she already knew the person who understood that ground better than anyone wasn't a consultant she'd have to hire. He was sitting in a small house 2 miles from the river. She called Travis. Not a meeting, not an ambush. Just a call. I want to offer you a position, she said. Director of Structural Integrity and Safety. Reporting straight to me, across every project we run, not just this one. She paused. Not because I owe you. Because you're the only person who's been right about this ground from day one, and I need that kind of right on my side permanently. There was a long stretch of quiet on the line. That's a bigger title than I've worn in a long time, Travis finally said. You wore a bigger one once. I've seen the drawings. That was a different life. Maybe, Paige said. Or maybe it's the same one, just picking back up where it got interrupted. What happens the next time somebody with the wrong friends doesn't like what I sign off on? Then they answer to me, Paige said. Not to a bonding company, not to a rumor. To me, directly, in writing. She let that sit a second. I can't promise you it'll never happen again. I can promise you it won't cost you your name this time. Travis didn't answer right away. Let me think about it, he said. That evening, over dinner, Grace noticed he kept staring past his plate. You're doing the quiet thinking face, she said, pointing her fork at him. Am I? You do it when it's a big decision. Like when we moved here. He laughed a little, surprised she'd tracked that. Somebody offered me a bigger job today, using the old kind of work. The engineer kind? He looked up. You remember that? You told me once, she said, like it wasn't a secret, because to her it never had been. Would you still make dinner? I'd make sure of it. Then I think you should take it, she said, with the seriousness of someone twice her age, and went back to her plate. Later, after Grace had gone to bed, Travis sat at the kitchen table with the level in front of him, running his thumb along the worn letters the way he had 1,000 times without thinking about it. He thought about the year everything fell apart, the year he decided being invisible was the only way to make sure it never happened again. He thought about the drawings sitting in some storage room downtown, holding up a building through a flood that took down its neighbors, proof he hadn't needed anyone to see until someone finally had. In the morning, over coffee, he called Paige back. 2 words. I'm in. Good, she said, and he could hear, even through the phone, that she meant it plainly, without any relief dressed up as something else. Travis walked onto the riverfront site on a Monday morning without the foreman's vest, in a collared shirt with a hard hat that had his new title stenciled under his name. A few of the crew shook his hand. No ceremony to it, Just a nod and a good to have you back. And he nodded the same way in return. The new foreman, the one who'd learned to double-check rebar joints the hard way, gave him a two-finger wave from across the lot and mouthed something that looked like thank you. He went straight to Section 2, the level in one hand, a fresh set of drawings in the other, standing where the sign-off should have happened the first time. The morning light came up gold over the cranes, and for a while he just stood there, taking the whole sight in the way a man takes in a room he hasn't been allowed to fully see in years. Paige came down not long after and stood beside him without a word, just watching him work. "It's strange," she said eventually, "watching you do this. Like hearing someone speak a language I didn't know you had." "I put it away for a while," Travis said, not looking up from the joint he was checking. "Didn't mean I forgot it. Doesn't look like it." He almost smiled at that. That weekend, Travis and Grace went back to the park along the James, the same bench, the water calmer now that the rain had passed. Grace had her invented country spread across her knees, adding new rivers. Paige arrived without an invitation, though it wasn't really a surprise either, carrying 2 coffees and a juice box she'd guessed right on the first try. Grace looked up, said, "Hi," like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and went back to her map. Nobody explained why Paige was there. Nobody needed to. Grace scooted over without being asked, making room, and asked Paige if she wanted to help name a river. Paige admitted she'd never named anything in her life that wasn't a line item on a budget. Grace looked mildly scandalized by this and handed over the pencil. "It has to mean something," Grace said, like she was passing down a rule that had always existed. "Not just a sound you like." Paige thought about it longer than the question probably deserved, then wrote a name along the thin blue line winding across the invented country, small enough that only the 3 of them would ever know what it stood for. The 3 of them sat by the water while the afternoon went long and gold over the James River. Grace drew. Travis and Paige watched the current without needing to fill the quiet. A barge moved slow along the far bank, low horn sounding once as it passed under the bridge downstream. Somewhere behind them, a dog barked twice and went quiet. Travis's hand rested on the level beside him, out of habit more than need now. Paige looked at the worn letters along the barrel and understood, finally, everything they meant. Get it level, then get it right. Not just concrete and steel, but a life, checked twice, adjusted honestly, allowed to stand straight again after 4 years of being told it couldn't. She thought about the trailer, the 11 seconds of silence after she'd said something she couldn't take back, and how far that silence had traveled to end up here, on a bench by the water, with a girl naming rivers, and a man who'd spent 4 years making sure nothing else he built would ever come apart quietly. Nobody said anything else. The river kept moving, and for the first time in a long while, Travis Boone didn't have anything left to hide.